welcome to this explainer. Have you ever felt that sudden, stomach-dropping panic of just being completely lost? Like your GPS suddenly dies on a pitch-black road, or you take one wrong turn in a city you don't know at all? Well, that terrifying, incredibly universal human feeling of wandering, that's exactly where our linguistic journey is going to start today. We're diving into one of the most profound metaphors in human history, examining how ancient texts took the horrifying physical reality of losing your way and used it to describe the deepest struggles of the human soul. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the concept of wandering, then dig into the Hebrew root ta'ah. After that, we'll look at sheep going astray, shift over to the Greek translation Planao, explore the age of deception, and finally, wrap things up with returning to the shepherd. All right, part 1. The concept of wandering. You know, back in the ancient Near East, losing your path in an unforgiving desert wasn't some romantic adventure. I mean, it was literally a matter of life and death, from starvation or, worse, predators. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. How exactly does a physically lost path turn into a spiritual crisis? Well, the biblical authors brilliantly took this terrifying, universally understood experience of wilderness wandering, and they used it as this deeply profound metaphor for the human condition. Moving on to part 2, the Hebrew root, ta'ah. Okay, so our foundational word here is ta'ah. It's an ancient Hebrew verb that means to err, wander, stagger, or go astray. And it pops up exactly 50 times in the Old Testament. It's used to describe a whole range of things, from literally just walking around aimlessly, all the way to the physical staggering of a guy who's, maybe had a bit too much to drink. This really illustrates how brilliantly the word toah functions. Think about Genesis 21, right? Hagar is cast out and is literally wandering ta'ah out in the physical wilderness. Now compare that stark physical reality to Psalm 119. There, the author uses the exact same word, but to describe a moral choice, the choice not to stray from God's precepts. So you see how ta'ah perfectly bridges the gap between the literal world and the spiritual one? Part 3, sheep going astray. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. That's Isaiah 53:6. And man, it just beautifully merges that linguistic nuance with a deep spiritual reality. Because let's be honest here, sheep aren't malicious creatures. They aren't plotting a rebellion. They're just notoriously directionless. They kind of just wander off blindly. And here's the absolutely crucial takeaway from this Old Testament metaphor. The shepherd is missing. Once a sheep has wandered off, it is completely, physically helpless to find its way back alone. So this wandering human condition that Talmud describes, it perfectly sets up why we absolutely need a divine guide. All right, part 4, the Greek translation, Planao. Which leads us to wonder, how does this whole concept of wandering evolve when we get to the New Testament? Well, the world of the New Testament takes this ancient idea of simply being lost, and honestly, it gives it a much darker, much more active twist. Let's dig into the Greek translation. Meet Planao. It's a Greek verb meaning to lead astray, deceive, or cause to wander. Now, according to the classical Greek literature in our sources, this word actually stems from a really old Indo-Germanic root that just meant spatial movement, literally spreading out or wandering. But the New Testament authors, they load this word up with heavy moral and spiritual dimensions. Across its 26 appearances in the New Testament, Planao really falls into 2 distinct buckets. On one hand, you have the passive use, like in Matthew 18. That's your innocent, single sheep just wandering off by mistake. But then you have the active use, like in Matthew 24, and that describes people who are intentionally misleading and actively deceiving others. And that brings us to part 5, the age of deception. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the noun and adjective forms of our root word. Planos means delusion or error. But planolis goes a whole step further. It actually refers to the deceiver or the imposter. So you see, the New Testament isn't just worried about the act of wandering anymore. It's super focused on the specific actors out there who are intentionally causing the deception. This exact dynamic is front and center in the teachings of Jesus himself. He urgently warned his followers, saying, "For many will come in my name and will deceive many." He's straight up warning them that false prophets are going to actively use Planao to trick the masses. People aren't just going to accidentally stagger off the path anymore. They are going to be confidently led off of it by imposters. And our source material reveals the ultimate architect behind all of this. Revelation 12:9 describes Satan as the one who deceiveth the whole world.
He is the grand orchestrator of Planao. So the biblical narrative paints this intense picture of a cosmic force whose primary objective is to lead humanity astray.
Look, if you take away absolutely anything from this section, let it be this massive narrative shift. Humanity has gone from being wandering sheep to being hunted prey. You're no longer just taking a wrong turn in the wilderness by accident. No, there are active, malicious forces out there luring you further into the dark.
Which brings us to part 6, returning to the shepherd.
Fortunately, this story doesn't end alone in some terrifying wilderness. The Apostle Peter elegantly ties this entire linguistic thread together in 1 Peter 2:25. For you were like sheep going astray, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. This connects the New Testament so beautifully right back to the ancient Hebrew of Isaiah 53. Those wandering sheep finally have a shepherd who actively goes out, seeks them, and retrieves them from the deception. All of which leads to Jesus' ultimate definitive declaration in John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Against this intense backdrop of Tetea and Planao, of staggering blindly and being actively deceived, Jesus provides the exact structural cure for humanity's chronic wandering. He doesn't just point to a path, he declares himself to actually be the path. So let's summarize our whole journey today by contrasting these two realities. On one side, you have the human problem, Tana and Planao. This represents our tendency to wander off, to fall prey to active deception, and to end up in spiritual darkness. But overcoming that is the definitive biblical solution, the way. This represents truth, life, and a fiercely protective shepherd who actively guides us all the way home. I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over on your own spiritual journey. If these biblical texts are right, and the wilderness of this world is indeed full of active deceivers trying to pull us off course, whose voice are you allowing to guide your path today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep seeking, and definitely stay on the path.